Welcome to the Clause YouTube channel.
Together, we strive for a safer, secure, and more stable world.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Clause YouTube channel Strategic Frontline. Today, we are privileged to have with us Ambassador Vivek Katju, who retired as Secretary and was an ambassador to Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Thailand. I welcome you to this podcast, Ambassador Katju.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being with you.
Today, we'll be discussing India's neighborhood, foreign policy, the geopolitical flux, and the coming of Trump, what problems he has created for all of us. And so the first thing we'll start is with Afghanistan. We know that Ambassador Katju was the ambassador there, and he knows the country better than most of us. So, Ambassador Katju, we know that Taliban Foreign Minister Mutaki visited India recently, and which signifies a kind of diplomatic normalization. There were counterterrorism assurances and development and humanitarian cooperation, especially the trade and connectivity. There were a lot of positives. But at the same time, we find that Afghanistan is also embroiled in the problem with Pakistan. The recent Istanbul talks brokered by Qatar and Turkey has failed. And there are views that Pakistan is allowing the third country to use its territory. So what are your views as far as India-Afghanistan relations are concerned? How is their trajectory going to be? And secondly, the Afghanistan-Pakistan relationship. Will there be greater internal turmoil for Pakistan to the extent that the Muni's leadership may be challenged? Or they will be able to deal with Taliban and put some more pressure on Afghanistan? So your initial comments.
Let me begin with your question on a challenge to Munir's leadership. The Pakistan army is, as we all know, at once a professional army and it is also a political force. The army chief and is the supreme person within the army, and no one has really succeeded in ousting an army chief through a coup within the ranks. There have been attempts occasionally in the past, but they've all failed. The only time I can recollect that the generals got together and asked an army chief to leave was when Ayub Khan, and by then he remained the president for almost 11 years, and had become extremely unpopular, and that unpopularity was also reflecting on the army. So if my memory is correct, the army generals got together and they told him that it's time to leave. And if memory serves me right, I think he handed over power to Yahya Khan and left. So I don't think that Munir is under any threat from within the army. Second, the army has always projected itself as the ultimate savior from a predatory India, and that position is unlikely to change. Over the decades, the army has ensured that the people of Pakistan look upon India as a permanent threat or a permanent enemy, and equally, the belief has been instilled in them that it's only the army that can save them. So when push comes to shove, my experience tells me that the people rally round the army. So that is as far as Munir and the army are concerned. Yes, the army is under pressure at the moment. It's under psychological pressure too. there are attacks taking place from uh, from groups, some of whom the army nurtured, like the TTP. There has been restlessness from the TLP. We know there is the Baluch insurgency going on, and the Pakistan economy too is still in an unstable zone. It hasn't. It has recovered from the difficulties it had some years ago, but its macroeconomic situation is not what would give comfort to any central banker or to the government, or for that matter, the army. So those aspects are there. Uh, when it comes to Afghanistan, let me tackle this in two parts. The first is internal Afghanistan situation as exists till now, and then Afghan Pakistan ties. Um, I think internally, the Afghan Taliban are in have consolidated their position, and I don't see any real opposition to them. It's over 4 years that they've been in power within the country, and they have all the territories of Afghanistan within their control. There isn't serious opposition to them from outside or from within Afghanistan itself. So that is one important aspect. Yes, there are fissures within the Taliban. After all, the Taliban are essentially a Pashtun force, though theologically they've been able to spread their wings, and they have co-opted the Tajik, the Uzbek. I don't know to what extent the Hazara, but really I do not have much information there, but I don't see or don't hear of any great restlessness in the in the high central highlands where the Hazaras live. So I think the Taliban position is also stable. The economic situation of Afghanistan remains fragile. Uh, it's it's still very, very poor and will remain so. Uh, I also don't see any great change taking place in the Taliban's orientation to on gender issues or generally on human rights. They have their own theology and they will stick to it. The fissures that there are, of course, the traditional tribal fissures, the fissures between Mashriq and Gharb, that's between the eastern Pashtuns and those around the southwest, Kandahar and its vicinity. And the leadership is today with Hebatullah and the Kandahari groups, but we can't underrate the power and influence of Mashriq, which is headed by the Haqqanis, as we know. Siraj is, I would imagine, their leader. I've not heard of any great opposition to Sirajuddin Haqqani either. So that is where the Taliban stand. The Afghan Republic held great promise, and I was India's first ambassador after the fall of the Taliban to the Afghan Republic. And it's an unfortunate thing, but the Afghan Republic could never develop roots, and it fell. That's a different chapter altogether. It fell largely because of its internal lack of cohesion, because of bad leadership, of bad political leadership, the bad choices made by the Americans and other NATO forces. I think there was no clarity in the American mind of what they wanted to do with Afghanistan, but as I said, that's the past. As far as Pakistan is concerned, let us not forget that uh, ever since 1947, Afghan Pakistan relations have always been tense. because of a variety of factors. And these, when I say that Afghan-Pakistan relations, I mean relations between Kabul on the one hand, or those who control Kabul, and Islamabad and Rawalpindi on the other. Yes, the Pakistanis nurtured the Taliban, so which means that they nurtured those who were in opposition uh, to the to Kabul. We also know that they supported the Taliban for the period 1996, or prior to that, 1994. When the Taliban began, there was a nexus soon established between the Taliban and the Pakistanis. I'm not going into the question of the origin of the Taliban, but uh, I think they also, the Pakistanis gave full support to the Taliban to continue with the insurgency once they were ousted in 2001 after 9/11 from Afghanistan. They gave them full support. They nurtured them in on their own territory, and they hoped that after the Taliban would come to power in Kabul, they would do two things primarily. The first was that they would abandon those uh, groups with whom they had a relationship, but who were opposed to the Pakistan state, and this includes the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan. The Pakistanis now try to call them by some other name. I think the Fitna-e Khawarij, but their hopes here were belied. I think the Pakistanis should have known it better, because there are inextricable linkages and kinship between the Afghan Taliban and the TTP, and the Afghan Taliban were unlikely to hand them over on a platter to the Pakistanis. The second, I think, aim of Pakistan was that the Taliban would play ball when it came to uh, their policy and their orientation towards India. And here too, they've been disappointed. Again, this should not have been surprising to Pakistan, because except for an interregnum, and as I followed, if you allow me a personal observation, as I followed these events, I was fairly sanguine that after a couple of years, the normal contradictions between Pakistan and Afghanistan would surface. My worry was the interregnum, what would happen in those the first 2 years when the Taliban would be very largely dependent on Pakistan. But as the world started more or less accepting the Taliban, and clearly the Russians now have recognized them diplomatically, the Chinese and the Pakistanis have sent their envoys, their ambassadors, even though they haven't diplomatically recognized them. So, as this process began, the Taliban would feel more comfortable, and their reliance on Pakistan for political cover would decrease. However, having said all this, I think Afghanistan's reliance on Pakistan's and supplies through Pakistan is fairly substantial. It's not as if it can't do without them. If push comes to shove, they can. I mean, the Afghans would get their stuff from, it's landlocked, so they need it from outside. The fuel, for example, they'll get from the Central Asian republics, Turkmenistan in particular, other materials that they need, they'll get through Iran and through the CARs, but certainly the preferred route is via Pakistan, and it is here that the Pakistanis feel that they can squeeze. One last point in this segment is that I think the Pakistanis felt that the Afghan Taliban had lived for long periods in Pakistan and had developed their leadership, their cadres, some of their cadres at least had developed economic stakes in Pakistan, and that they could squeeze them on that account. I think those attempts have also failed. Um, Finally, all this brings me to the point that there are inherent contradictions in Pakistan on account of Punjab's preeminence and the Punjabi aggressiveness. I mean, it was exhibited most foolishly by Raja Asif, the defense minister, who said if these talks fail, which you mentioned, taking being brokered by the Qataris and the Turks, then there can be open war, and we'll see what we can
Yeah.
do.
Outwardly, it feels that it's not very smart on the Pakistani to open the two fronts. I mean, it's not going to benefit them. But there is another question. We know since the time the Trump has come, the geopolitics has been in a flux, and the country which has benefited the most is Pakistan. We know how it gained momentum during the once the Trump came up. Uh, we know that there are no free lunches, and recently, if the news is right, that Moni's wife and her three children may have got US citizenship. So, in your view, what is the underlying agenda? What is Pakistan ready to offer? And also
Look,
related to this, the another area is Pakistan recently signed a strategic mutual defense agreement with Saudi Arabia. So, what are the implications of both of this? Is there any implication to us?
uh, let me make a few points here. I think the agreement between the Pakistanis and the Saudis is very, very significant for the region and especially for us. I read it as nothing less than an extension and an open admission that there is an extension of the Pakistani nuclear, Pakistan extending a nuclear cover to the to Saudi Arabia. Uh, it was the Saudi diplomacy traditionally has been low key, though under Mohammed bin Salman, they've become more aggressive. They've attracted more attention and they're willing to attract more attention. But nevertheless, I think this particular pact, because there can be no other meaning to this pact. Of course, the Pakistani army has always been the Janissaries, ultimately, of the Saudi regime. But despite this agreement, this mutual assistance agreement, uh, is an indication that if push comes to shove, the Saudis can rely on a kind of a Pakistani nuclear umbrella. This is very significant. Uh, what will the Saudis give in return? I think the Saudis will give greater macroeconomic support, perhaps greater financial assistance, but they will calibrate this assistance. One thing that I often say is that no one wants a nuclear Somalia. We often forget this, that Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and no one wants that a country with nuclear weapons should, especially as large as Pakistan, should get destabilized. The idea that it, in some ways it can be considered facile, but the idea that you can have nukes on the loose or that nuclear technology can spread is a frightening idea to almost all countries, apart from the fact that a destabilized nuclear country is inherently a dangerous proposition. So no one wants this. So that is why I've always believed that, and I've believed for decades that no one will allow Pakistan to sort of split. And if necessary, they'll be kept on a drip, as they've been kept on an economic drip for decades. It's sad in some ways because Pakistan is a country with great economic potential, but the choices they've made over the last 35 years in particular, and which they continue to hold on to, has resulted in this situation. And if a country makes those choices, a country makes those choices and has to then live with the consequences of those choices. So that is now, as far as America is concerned, I see that the United States is reverting back to its old policies. And recently, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said this plainly, that when he said that our desire to improve relations with Pakistan will not be at India's expense. Now, the latter part of the statement is hogwash, but the first part is important. Uh, I do not know. So let me conclude this segment by saying that yes, I see that the United States is more or less handing over, and I use that term deliberately. It's kind of handing over uh, far greater responsibility for the management of uh, India's western neighborhood to the generals in Pakistan than uh, it had for say the last 15 years or so. So, which means that the irritants that were being caused because of the American presence in Afghanistan have now uh, or are now becoming a story of the past. So, we should expect that the American Pakistani relationship will revert to what it was prior to the coming in of these irritants. Uh, My last point, if you permit me to say, I do not know from where we get these reports of Munir's wife and children getting US citizenship at all. I mean, if you can tell me from where you've got it and how authoritative it is. You are a scholar. I've been a diplomat. I don't take these reports seriously unless I have evidence, unless there's
Yes.
evidence to back them. So I don't even want to enter that thing. Of course, there are a lot of children of Pakistani generals who are studying in America, who are working. Musharraf's own son is based in America. So we know that. But does this mean that the generals did not follow their line of thinking when it came to the Americans during the 20 years from 2001 to 2021? No, they did. So I think, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that let's not enter into these facile
Yeah.
sort of thinking that look, his wife is there and his son is there, therefore Pakistan is going to change course. First of all, I don't know if we have evidence on this account. I'm stressing this point,
Yeah.
especially because I do think that it detracts from our attempts at seriously analyzing a geopolitical situation.
I understand what you're saying.
It's
Yeah.
not worthy of our, uh,
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 you know,
yes. There is
worthy
a
of our
change in,
attention.
yes, there is a change, and it's quite evident. And the change is so evident. I mean, then people start asking questions. If 6 months back, the things US India relations were quite close, but now suddenly things have changed. It has just dramatically changed. So there are questions, and the news comes up, and things come up just to say that yes, things are not normal. But what you pointed out is quite right. The generals and their relationship with the Americans have been quite good in the past also. So it's not a new thing what is happening now. Now, bringing this conversation further, I would like to ask you, coming to Bangladesh, we find that the ouster of Sheikh Hasina has led to political transition fallouts, and the UNIS has constantly given provocative rhetorics, whether it is our northeast or its strategic alignments towards Pakistan, China, and for that matter, there were news that US is also having a role to play in this. Recently, they had given red carpet to Zakir Naik, and Hafiz Said has also aid of those have also been spotted there. So, what, in your assessment, we need to do in order to deal with Pakistan? What should be our options and what should be our leverages?
Options with Pakistan or Bangladesh?
Bangladesh, Bangladesh.
Well, clearly, Yunus is being provocative. I think it's not very wise of the Bangladeshis to try to provoke India. But they're being provocative. You're right, they build their ties with the Pakistanis very substantially. Uh, they seem to have forgotten 1971 and the Pakistan. If the Pakistan Chief of General Staff visits Islamabad openly and is welcomed uh, with such warmth, apart from the intelligence boys, etc., it shows the kind of orientation that they're developing. I think the Chinese embrace is more serious. The Americans, I'm not quite sure what is their real objective in Bangladesh at the moment, except to come to the Chinese. As far as the Northeast is concerned, we'll have to pay greater attention because we can't afford the Bangladesh to become a base for hostility against us in the East, and that goes all along our frontiers, not only the Northeast, but the other parts of the East and the North. It's strategically very important for us to be conscious of the threats that we can face from these fronts. At the same time, we've got to make it plain to the Bangladeshis that India knows how to protect its interests and that we will do what we can. We should also make it plain to them, as I'm sure we are making it plain to them, that if they play with the communal situation in Bangladesh, they will be playing with fire. It's not something that will ever be to their advantage. As far as the direction Bangladesh is taking, that is something that I doubt whether we can do anything meaningful. My belief has always been to draw a line in our neighbors, with our neighbors, that look, if India's interests are threatened, we will do everything in our power to protect those interests. As far as your internal affairs are concerned, it'll be wise of you if you remain stable, if you remain moderate, and your politics is your own. We will not intervene in the process. It's except that if we feel that it's becoming a locus of anti-Indian activity, we will tell you that this is something that is crossing a red line, and we know what action we need to take, and we'll take those actions without any inhibitions. We don't need to go tom this publicly, but quietly you can send messages, and quietly you can, and practically you can demonstrate your will. I think there is a certain background in Bangladesh, and we can also tell them that look, we have Sheikh Hasina here, and there is a background between us and Sheikh Hasina, between us and Sheikh Mujib. There was Sheikh Mujib. This is not the first time that Sheikh Hasina has come to India, but that we will not. We will ensure that that her activities don't impinge on your internal developments. They are supposed to have this July charter and then to have elections next year and referendums, etc., about their polity. Now, I believe that's their internal process, and we should avoid any kind of intervention in that internal process, except to generally point out to them, as I said, that a stable, moderate country is more likely to become prosperous and then to be, you know, a
Yes.
strong theological state, which is
Yes.
not very advantageous.
Actually, they can also economically gain a lot. I mean, already the economic standards are falling. So I'm sure they will also realize sooner or later. I wanted to ask you.
I'm not so sure on that.
Yes.
My experience has been that it takes a long time for a country
Yeah.
uh, to give up the hold of theology. When theology grips the mind, then
Yes.
then economy takes a back seat. Social stability takes a back seat, and that is true for all theologically oriented states or societies. It's a very slippery slope,
Slope. Absolutely.
but
Correct.
it's a kind of a passion which grips the collective
Yes.
mind, and
Yes.
it's a very difficult process to drain out that passion.
Yes.
It has to be an
Abs-
autonomous process,
yes.
and it's only then that it succeeds.
The more time it goes and Bangladesh remains like this, the more difficult the process will be. There is a view that US is becoming more conciliatory towards China, as they believe that the US, the leverages what they have to curtail China's growth may not be there. As in fact, in certain areas, China is slowly but surely closing the gap, especially if you take the case of technology. So, do you feel in future both the countries will be working together, and how
Uh,
India should deal with it?
Look, I think there'll always be strategic competition between the US and China. China is a rising power. Its rise has been meteoric. Let's face it, China is inimical to us. But one must always face reality, I believe, however harsh it is. That has to be the basis of all cool analysis. Uh, China has become a major science and technology power, as you yourself have said. I think the Americans inadvertently perhaps aided and assisted this process. But there it is today, it's there for all to see. Where I think there will still remain elements of cooperation is uh, between China and the United States is the economy. In some ways, they are joined at the hip, and they will damage their economies very greatly if this trade or tariff war persists. The Chinese have bared their teeth through their restrictions or announced restrictions on rare earth exports, and we've seen uh, how aggressively the Americans and Trump have reacted to this. But let's see. It's tomorrow. I think Xi Jinping and Trump will meet, and the expectation, from what I read in the media, is that some preparations have already been done. Some agreements have been reached, which will prevent the imposition of higher tariffs by the Americans on the Chinese. So, to sum up, I would say that strategically there will be competition.
Yes.
Uh, but because the Americans, if they fold up in the Indo-Pacific, then they will no longer remain the power that they are even today. So they can't afford that. But economically, it's a far more complex situation, and the Americans have allowed it since the last 30 years to become more complex. Because I think at that time, in the 80s until the 90s too, They thought China was a platform for cheap manufacture, much like the Southeast Asian countries, and it wasn't so actually. And they're paying the price for that assumption, that wrong assumption.
So, moving on to our relationship with China, we find that we have moved from a cautious stabilization to renewed engagement through a high level diplomatic reset, where there is economic thaw and positive trade moves taken by both the countries. So, it's a constructive move. In your opinion, what do you feel? Do you feel that both sides are managing rivalry with controlled engagement, or it'll go forward? What do you feel? How the trajectory of India-China relation will be in the coming years?
I think it'll be very difficult, the India-China relations, and I think management will require extreme dexterity and nimbleness.
Yes.
There are certain basics. The first, at the moment, the Chinese don't consider us anything more than a great irritant. Their focus is on the United States. They would like a quiet front with the Indians, but they showed their hand in 2020. Let's not forget that. More than that, despite the warmth that has come between the United States and Pakistan, I doubt whether there will be any dilution of the Sino-Pak engagement. That nexus, and I use the word deliberately, will continue, and it's directed against us. So let's be clear on that score. Again, the Chinese would want this irritant because India is a power, even though we are 6 times, I think 5 to 6 times smaller than them economically, but we can cause some amount of difficulty to them, and they like to do it as long as their major focus is the United States. They'd like to avoid it. But the greater problem is for us, because we do not know, and I, for one, do not have any faith after 2020 in what the Chinese would do. So for us now, there'll have to be far greater expenditure and far greater mobilization on the LAC. I think it will be very imprudent to lower our guard. And the Chinese know full well that the way they are militarizing the Tibetan plateau will necessarily cause us to enhance our defensive preparations and to enhance our infrastructure around the LAC. And this means that we'll have to spend more funds here, and the Chinese economy is larger, so their surpluses are larger, and they can afford to do militarization, while everything that we do is at the expense of some development, but it has to be done. So that is where the difficulties I really see. So the basic nature of the India-China relationship will not change. I do not believe that personalized diplomacy and that the so-called personal chemistry has yielded any results. We've seen the consequences of that. And therefore, our wariness with the Chinese and all the activities will have to continue. We'll have to be especially mindful of the ingress they are making in our neighborhood. They already have 3 trilaterals. The Bangladesh, even though this trilateral is at a low level, the Bangladesh, Pakistan, China trilateral, and that is inimical to our interests. And then they have the Afghanistan, Pakistan, China trilateral. There are reports that they want to have a kind of an engagement collectively with South Asia. So they consider you a big South Asian power, but they say that we are whatever they are wanting is to indicative that we are the bosses, You are a large South Asian country, but you are a South Asian country. This is reverting back to that old thinking that they've had. So while it's good that things are cool at the moment, but I don't think that the 1990s situation can come back. And even while continuing with the engagement that we are, I, for one, would be very, very, very of the Chinese.
Ambassador Katju, before we take questions, one last question. What, in your view, should India do as far as South Asia is concerned? We are the major powers. Do you think you want to suggest something which we need to do, or what we are doing is good enough? We should carry on with that.
Well, our position in South Asia is not very comfortable at the moment. If you take it one by one, with Nepal, we have difficulties. Bhutan is charting a course. We know where that course will end. With Bangladesh, you've already mentioned. With Myanmar, we are in an uncomfortable situation. The regime is not going to go anywhere. The military regime. We've got to do business with them, I think, in a practical way. Sri Lanka and the Maldives, we've got to be conscious. In the Indian Ocean, the Chinese are increasing their presence rapidly. So we've got to pay far greater attention to a maritime neighborhood. And the West, you know the West. And above all this, as I've already mentioned, China is making a play for this region, and it is making no secret of this. So how do we deal with this? I think, one, we've got to pay far greater attention to it. Two, we've got to tell our neighbors that your internal matters are your internal matters. We have no preferences, but we have red lines when it comes to our security. I, for one, believe that there was great wisdom in the approach that Prime Minister Gujral had. And that was, and the Prime Minister Modi, has more or less repeated this when he said that we believe in that Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. That applies to India, also applies to the region, that we prefer the region to go ahead, go forward along with us. But he has also indicated quite clearly through his actions against Pakistan that we will not tolerate our security being jeopardized. So if it comes to stabilizing an economy like we tried to stabilize, and we did it well with the Sri Lankans, we will do so to the best extent that we can. That if there's a natural disaster and we can help, we will do so. But the ground rules are clear, that you can't establish a base which is anti-Indian. And this is the message that we must send the Bangladeshis quite unequivocally, that this is something where we draw a line. Now, the difficulty is that whereas many decades ago, our fear was that the Americans, if you recollect, in the 70s, even till the 80s, but certainly in the 70s, there was great fear that the Americans will build a flanks against us. These were the years of the Cold War. And we are very wary. The difficulty now is that the Chinese, what are they doing? And the Chinese have deep pockets, very, very deep pockets. So we've got to find ways of taking them along with us. And I think the key lies in impressing upon them that we have no interest in your internal affairs and we keep far away. But the caveat is that, again, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, the caveat is that you will not become a locus of anti-Indian activity. That we will not permit. And now we have far greater means in monitoring that
Absolutely.
than we had in the past, and we'll use those means.
Absolutely, very rightly pointed out. There is no compromise. There's no this thing, our national security comes first. So if you permit, we'll take some questions.
Please.
Okay. Mr. Akash Thadani, he is asking, plausibly the chessboard gaming is part of the deep state's geopolitical game plan. Probably Trump and Xi are willing agents, possibly to continue looting the work. Your views?
I have never understood the term deep state. I mean, it presumes that there are forces within a country that are outside the control of the normal political system. It's become a fashionable term. But what is the evidence that there are these forces, say in the United States or in EU or say in China, that are beyond the control or beyond the influence of their leaderships? I know that in the old days, President Eisenhower had talked of the military-industrial complex in the United States and its influence on US policy. But those policies were always enacted through the governments, through the US government. So I don't accept the premise of this question stroke observation of Mr. Thadani. Because, look, let's not get taken in by these fashionable things. Let's have evidence. What is the evidence that some of these major governments are in the hands of powers that are outside and who control them? Unless we have evidence to that score, I think it's better to take things in the normal way, to see that how the Americans are acting, how Washington is acting, how Beijing is acting, and then take it from there.
Yeah. This is another question. Ashish Kapoor. What is the likely fallout once His Highness the Dalai Lama passes away? How can it be managed?
I have no difficulty in admitting that I am not one of India's China experts. And I think one of my former colleagues who has spent long years on China, and there are some of them who have great expertise on China, would be in a better position to answer this. But I do see, from my limited experience, that when His Holiness passes away, there will be a change situation, and we'll have to manage that situation because it may lead to friction between us and the Chinese. And we'll really then have to see how we play the game. We've been very cautious right from 1959, when His Holiness arrived, till now, in ensuring that the Dalai Lama's presence here, despite all the activities that take place in Dharamsala, that his activities do not cast a long shadow on India-China ties. We've stood firmly with His Holiness and the people who support him, his followers, the people who revere him. We ourselves have great reverence for him. The Chinese have always, in turn, claimed that it is a major irritant in the relationship, but the Chinese also know that India has managed the Dalai Lama's presence with great prudence. And I think after his passing away, we will show the same prudence. One expects and hopes that the Chinese would also do the same, but I'm not quite sure.
One last question, Ambassador Katju. This is by Reku Singami. He says that US will not help India in any manner if tomorrow an Indo-Sino war happens. We'll be left alone. And hence the strategy should be to involve US in the equation somewhat or the other.
My experience is that at the end of the day, every country is left alone to defend itself. And a large power like India, and we are a power, we are a power. We have the wherewithal of becoming a greater power. And we are on the path of becoming a greater power. So at the end of the day, we'll have to find ways of defending ourselves. But uh, I'm sure that there will be cooperation with the US, if nothing else, in matters relating to intelligence. Because the US too would not like the Sino-Indian balance to tilt in, in a way that goes totally wonky. Let me leave this at that.
One last question. Uh, this is how should India formulate its Afghanistan policy?
With realism, with prudence, with far greater involvement, uh, but gradually. That is what I mean by prudence. I've advocated, to permit me a personal reference here, I think I was perhaps the first in the strategic community, and I earned a lot of ill will because starting from February 2017, I started advocating that we should talk to the Taliban. I was seeing that my friends, and I believe me, I have very, very dear friends in the Afghan, what was the Afghan Republic, and before that, what was the Northern Alliance. Because I found that my friends were not just simply able to hold the country together. So I saw that the Taliban was the coming force. And I also saw by 2017 that the Americans were tired of the war and were willing to accept a strategic defeat. So, based with that background, I believe that we should open up with the Taliban. And I'm very happy that we've raised the level of our representation openly to that of an embassy. We should have done that earlier, in my view. But I think we should wait a while before we send an ambassador. The second prong should be to assist the Afghans to allow greater visas while keeping strict security checks on those whom we give visas. There are ways you can do these security checks, but far greater visas to students for medical purposes, etc., to Afghan nationals to visit India, develop a pragmatic relationship with the with the Afghans, and also keep in mind that while Afghanistan is landlocked and we don't have direct land access, we cannot allow China to integrate Afghanistan economically with its western part, because the Hindu Kush has resources that are important for us. Some of these resources are known, some are unknown. So therefore, our interest in Afghanistan and our focus on Afghanistan has to become far greater. And I'm very happy that Mutaqi came here and things went well, obviously. And last point, it was good that we allowed him to go to the open. It would add a certain balance theologically in the Taliban mind, and that's something good for us. I'll leave it at that.
Your last comments, Ambassador Katju, on any other issue in South Asia or India, US, Russia, China, anything you would share with our viewers?
I think the evening is become long, and I've spoken very long. It's been 14 years since my retirement. I'm getting a little long in the tooth. So
no, but we had a lovely evening today, and you covered so many things, and especially Afghanistan in depth. We are really thankful to you, and thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Dr. Roshan. Thank you very much for inviting me. Pleasure being with you. Thank you.